What if the most painful truth about love isn't that it ends, but that it only survives under conditions no one wants to admit? You've felt it before. That quiet shift. The moment affection becomes distant. The moment warmth turns procedural. The moment you sense, without evidence, that something essential has withdrawn. And you ask yourself the same question everyone asks. What did I do wrong? But Machiavelli would tell you that's the wrong question entirely. 5 centuries ago, long before dating advice, before therapy language, before anyone pretended relationships were simple, a disgraced Florentine diplomat sat alone, exiled from power, stripped of reputation, forgotten by the world he once served. Niccolò Machiavelli had no money, no influence, no audience, only clarity. And clarity, he learned, is dangerous. Because when Machiavelli began to write, he didn't write about love as it should be. He wrote about attachment as it behaves. Not the stories people tell themselves, but the patterns they repeat. That is why he was condemned, not for encouraging cruelty, but for exposing incentive. The Catholic Church tried to bury his work. Rulers denounced him publicly while secretly studying him. And generations later, his name still feels radioactive, used as an insult by people who have never read a single page. Because Machiavelli didn't flatter human nature, he dissected it. Men are ungrateful, fickle, simulators and deceivers, he wrote. They shun danger and are greedy for gain. Not men as males, men as humans. And that distinction matters because Machiavelli was never writing about kings. He was writing about you, about why loyalty fades, why desire shifts, why love feels solid until it doesn't, and why, when relationships collapse, people swear it came out of nowhere, even though the signs were always there. You were just trained not to see them. Society taught you that love is supposed to be unconditional. That attraction, once earned, becomes permanent. That commitment freezes desire in time. Machiavelli saw something else. He observed that affection survives only while it remains useful, emotionally, psychologically, materially. Not because people are evil, but because survival always outranks ideology. When circumstances change, behavior follows. When safety erodes, attachment loosens. When effort declines, resentment grows. When the emotional cost outweighs the emotional return, even the most passionate bonds fracture. And Machiavelli didn't moralize this. He documented it. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything, he warned, must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. Replace goodness with idealism, and you begin to see the pattern. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because when you apply this lens to relationships, especially to women, you collide with a truth modern culture refuses to touch. Women were never choosing based on fantasy. They were choosing based on risk. For most of history, choosing the wrong partner didn't just mean heartbreak. It meant danger, dependence, loss of freedom, loss of survival. So female psychology evolved not around romance, but around discernment, evaluation, stability, foresight. And Machiavelli noticed something society desperately tried to hide. Women were judged more harshly for the same rational calculations men were praised for. Standards became cold, boundaries became selfish, discernment became disloyalty. But Machiavelli would call that projection, because when your future depends on another person, idealism becomes a liability. And love, real love, stops being a fairy tale. It becomes a contract, a living one. This is where most people turn away. Because if love is conditional, if loyalty must be maintained, if attraction responds to stability rather than promises, then the question isn't, why did she leave? The question is, what changed in the foundation before you noticed the collapse? And that question leads somewhere most people aren't ready to go. In the next part, we descend into the one force Machiavelli believed governed attachment more than passion, morality, or desire, and why misunderstanding it keeps repeating the same heartbreak under different names. Stay with me. There is a lie you were taught so early that you don't even recognize it as a belief anymore. You feel it, but you never named it. The lie is this, that once someone loves you, they will continue to love you simply because they once did. Machiavelli would call that fantasy. Not because love is fake, but because memory is weak. Affection does not live in the past. It survives only in the present. Men forget more easily the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony, Machiavelli observed. Cruel sentence, uncomfortable sentence, but listen closely to what he's really saying. Emotion bends around consequence. Attachment bends around stability. Loyalty bends around security, not sentiment. And when sentiment is all a relationship has left, it begins to decay quietly, long before anyone admits it. You've seen this happen. Maybe you've lived it. At first, everything feels effortless. Attention flows. Desire is mutual. Connection feels inevitable. And then, almost invisibly, something shifts. Not dramatically, not violently, just subtly. Conversations become shorter. Silences become heavier. Affection becomes conditional. You sense distance, but you can't explain it, so you rationalize it away. She's stressed. It's just a phase. Love isn't supposed to be exciting all the time. Machiavelli would say you missed the moment when the incentive structure changed. Because relationships do not collapse from betrayal first. They collapse from imbalance. When one person feels they are giving more than they are receiving, emotionally, psychologically, or practically, the foundation weakens. And women, for reasons biology and history carved into them, tend to feel that imbalance earlier. Not because they are colder, but because the cost of misjudgment has always been higher. For centuries, women paid for bad choices with their bodies, their safety, their freedom, their future. So female psychology adapted. It learned to monitor risk constantly. This is why stability matters more than promises, why consistency matters more than declarations, why presence matters more than intensity. Machiavelli understood that people do not stay loyal to words. They stay loyal to outcomes. The promise given was a necessity of the past, he wrote. The word broken is a necessity of the present. This wasn't cynicism. It was observation. When reality changes, attachment responds. And here's where men often feel betrayed. They believe love, once earned, becomes a permanent state, something that can be coasted on. Effort becomes optional. Growth becomes unnecessary. Responsibility becomes negotiable. And when the woman begins to withdraw, they call it sudden. Machiavelli would say nothing about it was sudden. The signals were there, just ignored. Because men are taught to value conquest, women are taught to value continuity. One chases attraction, the other monitors sustainability. Neither is wrong. But when you mistake attraction for security, the relationship is already unstable. Security isn't excitement. It isn't dominance. It isn't charm. Security is reliability under pressure. It's emotional availability without volatility, strength without intimidation, direction without control. It's knowing that if life destabilizes, the relationship won't. This is why a woman can love you and still leave. Not because the love was fake, but because love without security becomes a threat. Machiavelli would argue that no one abandons something that truly protects them. They abandon what endangers their future, even if it once felt beautiful. And this is the part no one wants to hear, because if love is maintained by security, then attraction alone is not enough. Chemistry cannot compensate for instability. Intensity cannot replace trust. Affection cannot survive uncertainty forever. Which leads us to the insight that changes everything. In the next part, we uncover the one motive Machiavelli believed sits beneath desire, loyalty, and commitment, and why misunderstanding it keeps repeating the same heartbreak under different faces. Don't look away yet. This is where the truth sharpens. If you strip away the arguments, the resentment, the theories, the blame, if you remove romance, morality, and modern language, you arrive at something far simpler. Machiavelli believed that beneath every human bond lies one quiet question, rarely spoken, but always answered. Does this relationship protect me or expose me? Not emotionally, in a poetic sense, but existentially. Men sooner forget the death of their father than the loss of their security, Machiavelli implied. Not because they are heartless, but because survival rewires memory. And this is where people misunderstand him. They think he reduced humans to greed. He didn't. He reduced them to preservation. Security is not luxury. It is not weakness. It is not comfort. It is the absence of threat. And women, more than men, have been forced by history to identify threat early or pay for it dearly. This is why female attraction does not operate like male attraction. Men often fall in love with potential. Women fall in love with trajectory. Men ask, who is she right now? Women ask, who will he become under pressure? That question changes everything, because pressure reveals structure. And structure is what Machiavelli watched most closely. He observed that people do not abandon love because they stop caring. They abandon it because the future becomes unstable. A man who is emotionally inconsistent becomes unpredictable. A man who avoids responsibility becomes unsafe. A man who resents strength becomes dangerous, not physically, but psychologically. And insecurity, Machiavelli understood, poisons attachment faster than betrayal. This is where society gets confused. It accuses women of being calculating. But calculation is not manipulation when the stakes are real. It is intelligence. For most of history, choosing wrong meant being trapped. So women evolved an internal radar, not for perfection, but for collapse. They sense when effort declines, when ambition stagnates, when emotional availability becomes conditional, when resentment replaces admiration, and when that happens, love begins to feel like risk. Machiavelli never said women were disloyal. He said humans remain loyal where loyalty makes sense. A wise ruler, he wrote, does not rely on promises when the reasons for them no longer exist. Replace ruler with lover, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Promises do not create security. Consistency does. Words do not stabilize attachment. Behavior does. This is why intensity fades, because intensity is unstable by nature. Security is quiet, predictable, often invisible, until it's gone. You don't notice it when it's there. You only feel it when it disappears. And when it disappears, something else takes its place. Anxiety, hypervigilance, withdrawal. Women don't leave relationships when love dies. They leave when trust in the future does. This is the turning point most men never see. They believe being chosen means they can finally rest. But Machiavelli would say the opposite. Being chosen means the responsibility begins. Because attraction is an invitation, security is a maintenance, and maintenance is ongoing, not dramatic, not performative, but relentless in its quiet reliability. This is why a woman can still feel affection and yet emotionally detach. Her instincts are not cruel, they are protective. And once protection becomes necessary from the relationship rather than through it, the bond is already fractured. This is not an accusation, it's a mirror. And if it feels uncomfortable, it's because it challenges the fantasy that love should exist independent of structure. But Machiavelli never believed humans were meant to live inside fantasies. He believed clarity was the price of freedom. In the next part, we confront the realization society avoids most, the truth that dismantles resentment and replaces it with something rarer, responsibility without bitterness. Stay. You're closer than you think. Here is the moment where most people turn Machiavelli into a villain. They hear everything you've just heard, and they translate it into bitterness. So love is conditional. So loyalty must be earned. So security matters more than romance. And instead of insight, they feel cheated. But Machiavelli would say that reaction is the final illusion resisting collapse. Because conditional love is not a flaw. It is the only kind of love that survives reality. Unconditional affection exists between parents and children, not between equals navigating a dangerous world. Romantic relationships are not sanctuaries from consequence. They are alliances, and alliances require upkeep. This is where resentment quietly destroys men. They begin to believe women are asking for too much, when in truth, they are asking for stability. They mistake standards for cruelty, boundaries for punishment, discernment for disloyalty. But Machiavelli never blamed people for protecting themselves. He blamed those who demanded loyalty without offering security in return. He who desires constant success must change his conduct with the times. That applies to love as much as power. Because the world changes. People change. Pressure exposes weaknesses that charm once concealed. And when a woman responds to that exposure, she is not betraying you. She is responding to reality. The painful irony is this. The very men who demand unconditional love often withdraw effort once they receive it. They stop listening, they stop growing, they stop carrying weight. And then they feel shocked when attraction fades. Machiavelli would say, you confused being desired with being dependable. One sparks interest, the other sustains attachment. This is why resentment is the wrong response. Because resentment keeps you focused on what you think you're owed, rather than what you're responsible for. And responsibility is where power actually lives. Not dominance, not control, not emotional leverage, but reliability. A man who can be relied upon under pressure becomes rare. A man who does not collapse emotionally when challenged becomes grounding. A man who does not outsource his sense of purpose to a relationship becomes attractive, not because he is distant, but because he is stable. Security is not passivity. It is presence without volatility. This is the insight Machiavelli hid beneath all his political language. Power is not force. It is predictability. And in relationships, predictability creates safety. Safety creates trust. Trust creates intimacy. Remove safety, and everything else erodes. This reframes the entire question. The question was never, why do women leave? The question was always, what kind of environment am I creating? Not through words, through patterns, through consistency, through how you respond when life becomes inconvenient. Machiavelli understood that people do not test love when things are easy. They test it under strain. This is where most men fail, not because they lack love, but because they lack structure. They expect affection to compensate for instability. But affection does not cancel chaos. It amplifies it. A woman does not feel secure because you care. She feels secure because your care is reliable, because it doesn't disappear under stress, because it doesn't turn into resentment, because it doesn't demand her self-sacrifice in exchange for your comfort. And here is the quiet truth most people never hear. Women do not leave relationships that make them feel grounded, even when they are imperfect. They leave relationships that make them feel like they are carrying the future alone. Machiavelli would call that wisdom, not betrayal. Once you understand this, something strange happens. Anger dissolves, blame loses its grip, and in its place appears something far more uncomfortable but far more powerful. Agency. In the final part, we bring this journey to its conclusion, what Machiavelli's insight ultimately demands of you, and why understanding it is not cynical, but quietly freeing. Stay with me. If you've stayed this long, you already feel it. Not relief, not triumph, clarity. And clarity rarely arrives gently. Machiavelli never offered comfort. He offered orientation. He believed the greatest suffering comes not from harsh reality, but from clinging to illusions that reality has already disproven. This is why his ideas survived exile, censorship, and centuries of misinterpretation, because they work, not in theory, in life. The final truth he leaves you with is not about women at all. It's about responsibility. Once you understand that love is sustained by security, not fantasy, you are freed from resentment. You stop asking to be chosen. You stop performing for validation. You stop bargaining with affection. And instead, you ask a harder, quieter question. Am I someone who creates stability, or someone who requires it to come from others? That question changes everything. Because when security comes from you, from your emotional regulation, your direction, your integrity under pressure, relationships stop feeling fragile. They stop feeling like auditions. They become partnerships. Machiavelli understood that people do not commit to potential forever. They commit to patterns. The nature of peoples is variable, he wrote. And whilst it is easy to persuade them, it is difficult to fix them in that persuasion. What fixes attachment is not persuasion, it's consistency. This is why chasing desire fails. Desire is reactive. Security is cumulative, built slowly, maintained quietly, proven when nothing is being demanded. And here is the part no one tells you. When you embody security, you don't need guarantees. You don't fear abandonment. You don't cling to outcomes because you are no longer trying to be chosen. You are choosing who has access to your life. This is what Machiavelli meant by power, not control over others. Control over yourself. The ability to remain stable when conditions change, to stay grounded when emotions fluctuate, to offer presence without possession. A woman does not feel secure because you promise permanence. She feels secure because you are steady, whether she is there or not. And paradoxically, that is what makes people stay. Not obligation, but trust. This does not make love cold. It makes it real. Because real love is not blind. It sees clearly and chooses anyway. This is why Machiavelli's insight is not misogynistic, cynical, or cruel. It is humane. It acknowledges that humans, including women, are not looking to exploit. They are looking to survive with dignity, to attach without losing themselves, to love without betting their future on instability. And when you understand that, something subtle but profound happens. You stop fighting human nature. You start aligning with it. You stop demanding unconditional devotion. You start building conditions worth staying for. That is not manipulation. That is maturity. So if there is one thing women want, beneath culture, language, and era, it is the same thing Machiavelli believed everyone seeks. A future that feels protected, not threatened. A partnership that expands life rather than destabilizes it. A bond where strength does not turn into resentment. And once you understand this, the game ends. Not because you've won, but because you no longer need to play. If this resonated with you, if it articulated something you felt but never had words for, leave your thoughts below. What part unsettled you the most? And if you want more explorations like this, psychology, philosophy, the truths we're taught to avoid, subscribe, not for answers, but for clarity. Because the real world isn't as romantic as the fairy tale, but it's the only place where love actually lasts.